I don't think I need to clarify that, depending on who you ask, this topic will procure quite the assortment of answers based on preference, so in all actuality this video should be a top 20 or even top 30. Regardless, gacha games aren't one for balance adjustments. Rather than make previously obtained characters stronger, they choose to release an upgraded version of them as a ploy to get us to spend more money. The only time they'd retroactively increase the strength of existing ones is when a new system is introduced, such as hypothetically, another ascension, bringing every character to level 100 along with a new talent or perhaps new elemental skill or burst. That's usually how it goes with gacha games. Not long after Tonli's release, there was inordinate amounts of backlash directed at Mihoyo for his dreadfully underwhelming kit, not befitting one with the title of Archon, the supposed god of their element. As a result, he was given significant buffs across the board, better shielding, better team utility, and some nice HP scaling on his damage to boot. That would be the first and only time an individual was buffed, but it gave the community some food for thought. What if other units could receive balance changes, and more importantly, what would they be? I wanted to do something a bit more personal today and make my own list of 5 characters that deserve buffs along with what I have in mind for them, and after you're done watching, I'd like to hear your list of 5 and what you'd give. I don't really have a real motivation or agenda for these units. Granted, this is a highly subjective video, but at the same time I've always felt some pity for these units out of consideration for the kit being usable, just missing 1 or 2 things that prevent it from shining. As usual though, and I can't stress this enough, just because a character isn't mentioned here doesn't mean they don't need buffs. Like I said, we could have a top 30 list. Now, if this video performs well, then I'd be more than happy to do a part 2, but for the time being I'm sticking with just 5 for now. Without further ado, let's begin, starting with Dluc. As one of the original main DPS 5 stars next to Koting, Dluc holds a special place in the hearts of many who were fortunate enough to pull for him. And even for me, who got lucky enough to score both, I found myself using Dluc for more overworld exploration and domain clearing, while using Koting for single target bosses. On a conceptual level, Dluc's playstyle has a lot of potential going for it. Despite being a great sword wielder, he doesn't stray too far from your typical quick swap rotation. Not to mention his attack pattern doesn't even feel that sluggish thanks to Searing Onslaught, giving him a rather fluid transition between attacks, uncharacteristic of claymores. 2 big things hold him back though, the first being damage or lack thereof. Dluc's numbers are simply far too low even with substantial investments. There's no chance in any situation or scenario where he'll be able to outdamage Hu Tao. He's not unusable mind you, but as a pyro character, your personal damage output takes up the most equity in how you're judged. So when that personal damage falls short relative to your peers, it's only natural you're shoved aside. The second is that he doesn't have a screen nuke. Pyro's 2 relevant reactions are Vaporize and Melt. Even though Burgeon is a viable and accessible option, the only one you'd equip for that approach is Toma. Burgeon is also heavily overshadowed by Hyperbloom for obvious reasons. That aside, Vaporize and Melt are amplifying reactions, meaning they increase the strength of the triggering attack's own damage. Dluc does have a screen nuke in the form of Dawn, but its damage format is not a one-hit wonder. Instead, it does a portion of the initial damage on strike, followed by a barrage of pyro hits as the Phoenix travels before doing that same initial damage at the end. So if we were to portion it out of 100, it would be like 30, 10, 10, 10, 10, and then 30 again. Disregarding the various internal cooldowns of each category within the attack, you're obviously not getting as much out of a single vape reaction than if it were a single knockout punch of 100%. With this in mind, along with increasing his numbers across the board, I feel like Dawn should get rid of the continuous damage as the bird travels and instead just do big damage at the start and at the end, each with separate internal cooldowns so you can vaporize off both attacks. He can still retain the Pyro Infusion after for some extra damage, but having a burst nuke will at least put him on par with Hu Tao in functionality. I'm not arguing he should be a carbon copy of her, as that would cheapen the value of the latter. Hu Tao was always seen as the DPS, while Dluc was more for clearing. But he needs to work better with his team. I feel like Xiangling cannot damage him without even having to be the active character. It would also be nice to upgrade his constellations. C4 and C6 play off Searing Onslaught, which is underwhelming as is. I like that they incentivize attacking in rhythm because I play League of Legends and there are a ton of champions with a similar vibe of attack, skill, attack, skill, attack, skill. But if they're gonna do that, he needs a lot more power in each hit to offset what he's missing out on with reactions. Moving on, Chichi is the next one. Before Dia came out, Chichi was considered by many to be the worst 5-star in Genshin Impact. Cryo has a stacked roster, especially early on when Pyro and Cryo were the head honchos. Ayaka and Ganyu wasted no time cementing themselves as the top 2 in their class, but there's still a ton of competition in the supporting department. Chichi's claim to fame was her immense healing capability, which even to this day achieves the highest total regeneration possible out of any single unit. The problem is that that's all she does, just healing. At present, Kokomi and Bennett are the 2 best healers in the game, not for their healing prowess, but what else they do. Bennett's incredible attack steroid and decent battery, Kokomi's Hydra application, and serviceable damage output. Damage-wise, Chichi does nothing. Her little orbiting ball and burst damage don't do nearly enough to validate her taking up a party slot. She produces no energy whatsoever despite having a very expensive elemental burst, and her cooldowns are unfairly long. Herald of Frost has a 15-second cooldown with a downtime of 30, and though one could make a case that the periodic cryo damage is helpful for freeze, cryo units already excel at persistent application. That's their gimmick, persistence. To make matters worse, Diona is a 4-star character who does far more than Chichi. The former also has HP regeneration, but it's attached to an AoE cryo field that debuffs enemies, gives you elemental mastery if you have C6, has the same persistent application as Chichi's skill if not better, and on top of that she has a shield that gives you bonus movement speed and lower stamina consumption. It's not great, but definitely far better than what Chichi has, and Diona is a 4-star. There's a reason Chichi became a meme for failing 50-50. Out of all the off-banner 5-stars you could get, again before Dia came out, she's the one you didn't want. At the very least, Mona, Jean, Dluc, and Kuting had some use cases, but Chichi straight up was the one character many would say you should never use because there are so many infinitely better options out there. So let's talk buffs. Everything related to healing is fine, we don't need to touch that. What we do need to do is increase her other utility. Right out the gate, lower that skill cooldown. I'm aware you can equip Sacrificial Sword to circumvent this, but weapons should never compensate for a character's shortcomings. They should enhance what they already do. Second, energy. Literally every character in the game has some kind of energy recharge except her, and with how expensive her ultimate is to cast, she needs it. Third, considering Bennett is attack-oriented and Kokomi is reaction-oriented, maybe we can make Chichi the debuffer healer. Have it so everyone affected by a talisman takes bonus damage from all sources, or have their defense reduced. Constellation 4 decreases the attack of marked enemies by 20%, overlapping with Diona's passive talent, which does the exact same thing. I would advise altering Chichi's first passive talent, where upon triggering an elemental reaction with Herald of Frost active, instead of healing bonus, it should reduce enemy defense. That would give more incentive to use Chichi. It won't make her top tier, mind you, but this video isn't about making every character overpowered, it's about making weaker characters at minimum viable. Next up is one I bet you weren't expecting, Ningguang. So we all know Geo is the worst element in the game, that much is undisputed fact. The two initial 4-star Geo units, Noelle and Ningguang, have had it rough from day one. At the very least, Noelle has some uses in Mono Geo for those who don't have Ito, and her tanking capabilities can be of use in the few survival situations we have. On the other hand, I can't find very many applications for Ningguang if there are any at all, which is disappointing for the de facto political leader of Liyue. While most Catalyst wielders opt for supportive playstyles, namely the 4-star ones, main DPS Catalyst user, a choice that sadly worked against her popularity. She has a good premise. Similarly to Yanfei, she can spam charge attacks at no stamina cost by weaving in normal attacks, increasing her damage. In addition, her elemental burst fires homing projectiles to nearby enemies that increases if you use your skill first. Speaking of her skill, it has a rare ability to deflect projectiles, giving a situational utility. If you max out her constellations, you can also get some good damage. Overall, I like her kit as is, and I think Ningguang mains do as well. Her problem is identical to Dluc's. In spite of her consistent output due to not being tied to reactions for DPS, she doesn't do enough. Her damage ceiling, while impressive against a single target, doesn't climb very high. That's just the problem with 4-star main DPSs in general though. They can never be better than 5-star main DPSers, as that lowers the demand to pull for them. It also doesn't help that Geo has no offensive reaction to back her up. Taking into account her unique attack style entailing multiple fragmented shots, one buff I have in mind for her is to give some kind of passive that raises her damage output the more individual attacks you get on a single target. Contrasting with Noelle and Ito, who have bigger emphasis on wide swings for damage, naturally making them better at AoE, with her Star Jades having multiple shots concentrated on a single opponent, it would be cool to have her fit the archetype of Relentless Attack, where the more she attacks a target, the more damage she does, to really drive home the fact that she's the Geo unit of choice for bossing. For the sake of argument, we can have it so she gains, let's say, 5% bonus damage for every instance of Geo damage dealt to the same enemy that caps out at like 100 after 20 attacks. The obvious trade-off is that she'll require extensive field time, but it bears repeating that I want to at least give them a niche where they can be viable, not necessarily top tier. We don't want to power creep the game. Alternatively, she can have more interactions with the Jade Screen, such as using it as an amplifier boost shield where upon attacking through the Jade Screen, damage is increased, giving it both offensive and defensive utility. Something like that would make her gameplay more engaging. I enjoyed the animation of all those gems flying around like missiles, so I wouldn't mind her becoming a machine gun type fighter. Fourth character will be Candace. While I'm a fan of her design and character, I'm not a fan of her gameplay for the simple reason that it's completely outclassed by Xingqiu. Let me explain. Her stratagem is based on normal attack enhancement via 2 properties, increasing the elemental damage dealt from normal attacks and imbuing melee weapons with Hydro. She also deals a pulsating burst of Hydro damage whenever swapping between party members, but that's more of a side dish. Anyways, while Candace does have her premise distinct from other Hydro characters, in practice, it's a roundabout and less efficient way to achieve the same outcome. For example, her elemental imbue was intended to allow any and all melee characters to get the 20% buff on normal attacks, but virtually all meta on-fielders have their own self-imbue these days, defeating the purpose of that infusion. And even if you do want more Hydro application, the Hydro roster is flushed with units who have excellent application already, meaning the only reason you would want to use Candace is for the normal attack bonus damage. However, in almost every scenario, Shinto's Rain Cutter Echo damage eclipses the bonus you would be giving your active character, even with max HP Candace and her Constellation 6. At present, her main synergy is housed in Bloom teams, but as we know, the Hydro roster is not short-staffed in this department whatsoever. I appreciate the attempt at trying to separate her from other Hydro supports though, which is why I believe what they should do is tap into her other weapon, the shield. From what I remember, we don't have a single Hydro shielding unit. We have shields for every other element except Animo and Hydro. Candace does gain a shield, but it only holds for the duration of her skill animation. I get that it's supposed to function like Beidou's Counter-Strike, but it would be cool if that shield could persist. Personally, I can see her finding occasional synergy with Hu Tao. Hu Tao typically doesn't want to be healed, so she teams up with shielders. If on the off chance you can't run double Hydro on her because you need to move either Xingqiu or Yelan over to the other party, then maybe Candace wouldn't be a bad alternative to Zhongli. Her normal attack damage bonus works off any elemental damage, not just Hydro, and Hu Tao does auto attack. But on that note, Candace's damage bonus should extend to charge attacks as well. Letting her shield persist after her skill ends and also empowering charged attacks would hopefully improve her standing in a lot of teams. Candace will still be weaker than Xingqiu or Yelan, but I can imagine a good number of fights that need a bit more survivability, but you still want to have that DPS augmentation and Hydro application. Or, and I'm just spitballing here, have it so her Hydro infusion overlaps with the active character's own infusion so that their normal attacks apply both Hydro and whatever their own element is. That would open up a Pandora's box of theory crafting on its own. Okay, last one. Now this is gonna be kind of hard for me to go over since I'm technically talking about multiple characters, but Traveler needs a buff. They need a lot of buffs actually. To be fair, DMC is fine. Animo, Geo, and Electro Traveler, however, are among the worst in the game. I get that they're free and gacha games normally don't want free units to be overpowered to pressure us into wailing for the actual overpowered units and blah blah blah, but they can't look me dead in the eyes with that statement when the Power 5 exists. I'm also aware that Traveler is supposed to give you a taste of the mechanics and conventions of each element, while with how Animo Traveler teaches you about crowd control and absorption, Geo Traveler teaches you about constructs, Electro Traveler teaches you about energy, Dendro Traveler teaches you about Dendro's team synergies, but it really sucks that the main character is this laughably weak. I don't harbor unreasonable expectations either. MC doesn't need to be this destructive force of destiny no matter how much the plot tells us they are, but they shouldn't be on the complete opposite end either. I know some of you don't like it when I do this, but using Starwell for comparison, I like how they balanced the Trailblazer. Apart from having a far superior personality, their power level was made to be on par with the average 4-star in usability, at least the Fire Trailblazer. So while they're by no means best in slot, they have uses and can more than give credit to team. In Genshin, the Traveler's power level is around the same tier as Amber or Xinyan, basically not worth it. I feel like having them as a solid B tier would be more justifiable, because right now they're hovering around C and D tier. In their defense, we haven't seen Hydro, Pyro, or Cryo Traveler yet, so maybe things will improve, considering Electro MC was an improvement from Animo and Geo, and Dendro MC was the first viable one. For what buffs to give the existing ones, I'm not sure since there are 3 of them. To be frank, I can't even recall what each version does in greater detail since I haven't used them in years. But based on what I do remember, it should be a mixture of number improvements and utility, as so far all travelers are support-oriented. On the other hand, they can opt for quality of life instead. For starters, make it so we can switch their element remotely, since we can do that for Trailblazer and Starrail. Second, make it so their talents do not require Crown of Insights. The fact that we need 12 crowns to 10-10-10 them and counting is absurd. Or is it only 10? I don't know if their normal attack rank stays the same. I'm assuming it doesn't since they have different skill names, but that would also be nice, not having to completely start over from scratch with every new element. Alrighty, that's my list. As mentioned, be sure to leave your own list of 5 characters that need buffs in the comments down below, and if you guys want me to make a part 2, let me know as well. I could easily do a part 2, 3, and even 4 with how many units in this game could use some love. I haven't even talked about Xinyan, Chongyun, Lisa, Amber, Dia, Toma, Razor. God, there's so many. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at VarsVRM, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.